Exciting news, my friends. This is the kind of moment that rewires how you see a country. Today, watching Mark Carney step through the grand doors of Abu Dhabi's Sheikh Zayed Mosque, I felt a jolt, not just at the scale or the symbolism, but at the sheer absurdity of it all. A Canadian Prime Minister greeted with a royal welcome that would make even a seasoned diplomat jealous. As the Emirati press surged around him like he was the main event at a global summit, there is no other word for it. This was a pivot in real time. This was the day Canada re-entered the geopolitical arena, with Carney not simply talking, but building an entirely new corridor of wealth and influence in a world where old alliances are cracking. And unless you were glued to the right feeds, you probably missed just how radical this shift is. Today, I want to unpack why this happened now, how Carney's visit changes Canada's future, and what no one wants to admit about the real stakes, not just for Canada, but for everyone caught in the crosswinds of America's trade wars. So let me ask you very quickly, when you see a leader like Carney breaking decades of diplomatic inertia, securing billions in investments from countries that used to look right past Canada, does it make you feel hopeful or uneasy about what's coming next? I'm curious where you land. Let me know in the comments below. Before we begin, your favorite part of the video, Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Soft Lies, is out now. It's a book about how to improve your own critical thinking. Honestly, the reviews and the feedback I'm getting on it are truly heartwarming, so I genuinely want you to check it out. I've now also added a 24-minute podcast session discussing the book in detail, so for anyone curious about that, the links are below to both, along with a launch video if you want to dig deeper. There is also a subscriber discount, so hit that subscribe button and check them out. But now, let's dig into this story. It is genuinely hard to overstate how rare today's scenes were. For 4 decades, no Canadian leader has met face-to-face with the president of the UAE. This was the first such in-person bilateral meeting since 1983. Carney didn't just end the drought, but he became the gravitational center of an entire press corps, cameras jostling for position, journalists sprinting to capture every move. I watched the footage and had to laugh, then kind of winced for a bit. For a country often seen as polite, peripheral, sometimes even invisible in the big rooms, this was such a beautiful inversion to see. The UAE state machinery was on display, and yet the attention was on Carney, not the hosts. There's something quietly surreal about that reversal, no? Why does this matter? Because optics at this level are the market signals of power. When a leader is welcomed as a guest of honor at one of the UAE's central ventures and within the architecture of state power, it is not about photo ops or who wears the best outfit, but it's a message that you are being taken seriously. And as Emirati media surge forward, a reaction normally reserved for heads of state who changed the game, you could almost sense the world recalibrating around Canada, if only for a moment there. But the spectacle was just the overture. What happened next was the core of the day, and the reason it made international headlines in a way that diplomatic tours rarely do. Behind closed doors, Carney and his team signed a new investment protection agreement with the UAE. This is huge. In the jargon of global finance, this is a technical term. In reality, is the opening of a new economic corridor. This is not just symbolic stuff, and it isn't a soft promise for the cameras. This is the architecture of a future where Emirati capital, drawn from sovereign wealth funds that move mountains, not pebbles, is guaranteed a predictable, stable environment to flow into Canada. A decade ago, this would have been unthinkable. But today, as the United States turns inward and Trump's volatility shakes the continent and the planet, probably space too, who knows, Carney is betting that Canada's survival, maybe even its ascension, requires new friends, friends with capital, friends willing to take risks on mega projects, ports, LNG terminals, critical minerals that can be founded by hope or nostalgia alone. If you strip away the speeches, what's actually happening is existential. For years, Canada has whispered at the global investment table. Today, it has a megaphone, and that changes everything. To think clearly for a second, you have to hold 2 conflicting ideas at once, like the eye of contrast tells us. On one hand, Canada's sudden prominence in Abu Dhabi is a direct response to being squeezed by America, its biggest customer, closest neighbor, and most unpredictable threat. On the other hand, though, Carney's moves are also about ambition, breaking the gravitational pull of a country that can't really be relied on anymore. The new talks announced, which are a full-scale free trade negotiation with the UAE, are a survival strategy, but also a statement of intent. Tariffs, threats, abrupt policy shifts. Trump's America has made it very clear that old alliances no longer offer safety. And what was Carney's response? He built an economic shield. Lower tariffs, expand access for Canadian airspace, mining, and food exports, open the door for opened the door for Emirati capital to back Canadian mega projects, not just for quick profits, but for generational infrastructure. We're not just talking about money anymore, my friends. We're talking about dignity. After decades of playing second fiddle to the US, Canada is orchestrating its own tune. And yet this is also the kind of issue that punishes emotional thinking, but also punishes apathy. If you overreact, you can get lost in the euphoria of a diplomatic win. If you ignore it, you miss the tectonic shift underneath. But here is the part that struck me the most, and I say this as somebody who tries to pay attention to the choreography beneath the headlines. Every major public event like this, the mosque tour, the official handshakes, was mirrored by a set of private high-stakes meetings as well. Carney was not just seen, he was heard and listened to and respected. Meetings with sovereign wealth fund heads, strategic dinners with national security advisors, conversations about not just trade and technology, but regional security, the kind that can reshape alliances far from the cameras. This was not just ceremony stuff. We are talking about working in rooms where national futures are plotted, sometimes on the back of a napkin maybe, sometimes over a multi-course dinner, it doesn't matter. And Carney was in every single one that mattered. The symbolism here is very obvious, but the consequences are a little less so, because for years Canada has struggled to attract major sovereign wealth, but today the turns have tabled. Canada is no longer asking politely, it's designing the invitation list itself. To really understand this shift though, listen to what Jean Charest, former Quebec Premier, now co-chair of the Canada-UAE Business Council, said from the ground. It's fine that we have the issue with the Americans, but at the end of the day, it's about us. If we're going to diversify our trade, if we're going to prosper, we have to go out there to drum up some business. And the person who has to lead that is the Prime Minister. None of this gets done unless the Prime Minister leads, and that's exactly what he's doing. This is amazing. There is a raw honesty to it, right? For decades, Canada's foreign policy has been very reactive, timid even. It's only when pressed by external shocks, tariff, trades war, hostility from old allies that true evolution becomes possible. But today, the evolution is visible. Canada is not just reacting anymore. It is asserting, pivoting, leading, and is being recognized for it, not just tolerated for it. Toward the end of the day, the mood among global analysts shifted from skepticism to respect. The UAE now sees Canada as a strategic partner, stable, technologically advanced, increasingly relevant in sectors from agriculture to airspace. And meanwhile, for Canada, the UAE offers what the United States can't really offer right now: stability, capital, and the willingness to fund nation-building projects with patience and not panic. This is more than a deal, I think. It's a realignment of a sort, the kind of moment that historians point to and say, that's when history changed. Not just for Canada, but for any middle power learning to survive in a world of giants. It's also a reminder that a good critical thinker doesn't just ask what happened, but who benefits from you reacting a certain way. There will be those who try to spin this as mere optics or as a desperate move. And in my view, the truth is much more complicated and more exciting. For the first time in decades, Canada is playing offense, not defense. So what does it all mean at the human level? When you watch a country step out of the shadow of an unreliable ally and enter a room full of new possibilities, there is a pulse of excitement and a flicker of anxiety about what comes next, right? For those who answered the earlier questions, hopeful, uneasy, maybe both, I don't think you're wrong at all, because history rewards the bold, sure, but it also tests their foundations, right? Carney's UAE trip was not just a diplomatic milestone. It was a statement that in a world defined by volatility and fractured trust, there is still space for strategic imagination. If you've ever doubted that a country like Canada could be more than a polite bystander in the global drama, well, today the camera told a different story. And as I watched the Emirati press chase Carney through the marble halls, I couldn't help but wonder how many other middle powers are waiting for their moment. If that kind of thinking resonates with you, if you want to understand how to navigate the noise, the hype, and the complexity of our current moment, I think you'd really enjoy my book. It's called Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Soft Lies, and it's written for people who want to stay grounded, think clearly, and live in reality, even when the world makes that feel impossible. There is also a 24-minute podcast episode that unpacks some of the ideas behind Awake in a more relaxed, conversational way, perfect if you prefer to listen while walking, driving, or just taking a break from screens. You'll find the links below. I'd love to know what you think of it. As always, thank you so much for being here and for thinking through these questions with me. If you like the conversation, consider subscribing for more, and don't forget to check out these other videos that I've linked here as a natural next step for a deeper dive.